Amen. Okay. I want to again commend Ruvain on the shiur from Friday morning and and I followed up. Remember, he was sort of in and out, and we all thought it was perhaps from something from coming from his building. That's not the case. I spoke to Andrea, and she indicated that the problem is here, that the reception from outside into the building is poor.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the I was told by the head of security that they don't have Wi-Fi for members, only video.
They're working on it.
That could be,
They're working on bringing in
but I know
yeah.
that was
Yeah.
the case. I asked them.
They're working on bringing in a new one.
They've got, anyway, so again, I commend Ruvain for the shiur on Friday. Okay.
Roommate or is it memory?
All right, but that was, so we will have to keep in mind that in the future unless we hear otherwise. Okay. All right, and I ask your forgiveness since I came down with a cold. My wife decided to be very sharing. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Okay. Year of learning sponsors, Isaac and Evelyn Blachor, in memory of his sister Chaya Rachel Bas Isser. Can you hear me? Right? All right, friends of Leonie Meis and Malaya Saba Bas Chanuk Zundel. Friends of Melaskotsky, Moshe Zelig Ben Mordechai. Martin Lippman and family in memory of his wife Malka Chana Bas Pinchas. A month of learning, Carol and Josh Sanborn in memory of her father, Yoshua Shia Ben Moshe Yehuda Cohen. Sarah Alpert and family in memory of her husband, Harav Tzvi Lipa Ben Hillel. Josh and Carol Sanborn in memory of his mother, Cannabis Aye Leib, and his father, Shmuel Aye Ben Baruch. B. Pizer in memory of her mother, Rezel Bat Shammai. Leo and Tova Zimmer in memory of his father, Tzvi Ben Azriel, and his mother, Yocheved Bat Yaakov Menachem Mendel. Mel and Haran Haller in memory of his mother, Fega Bas Yaakov. Be Pizer in memory of her stepfather, Avram Michal Ben Shmuel Halevi. Jill and Perry Meltzer in memory of her father, Yaakov Ben Yosef. A week of learning by Sid Paris in memory of his mother, Yudis Bas Tzvi, and his father, Chaim Ben Aaron Kohen. Jack Kaufman in memory of his wife, Devorah Necha Bas Mordechai Tzvi. The family of Esther Shepatovsky in memory of their mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother, Esther Eva Bat B'Tzalel. Then we had a day of learning yesterday, was by Zahava Bam, in memory of her father, Naftali Ben Harav Pesach Chaim Menachem. Today is the 5th, right? So we have a day of learning by Stephen Hamburger, in memory of his mother-in-law, Hindel Bas Aaron, by Ernie Bloom, in memory of his mother, Alta Chana Bas Harav Yechiel. Okay. The Neshamas having Aliyah, Krank Rafia, Velti Yeshua Shamatria, Kobane Israel, a good Gimbed Shtia. Okay. All right. All right. So I'm going to have us pick up where Rabbi Green left off yesterday. Okay. Rabbi Shimon Green has been doing the daf on Shabbos, and those who are able to make it, I think you would really benefit from his shiurim. Okay.
What about tomorrow?
That's a good question. Okay. Tomorrow is Monday. Tomorrow is regular. Yeah. Question is Tuesday. That's going to be the okay. All right. So, okay, Michael. All right. Okay. All right. So I'm going to have a start. It's about 7 lines up from the bottom on Mem Amud Beis. Okay. Mem Amud Beis. I'm not sure where Art Scroll would call that, whether it would be 40B2, I'm guessing, right?
40B2.
Right? Okay.
What word we started? You said remember?
The first word on the line is ta'ar. It's opposite the Tosafos where it starts umai.
Mem on the base?
Yeah, mem amud beis. Okay, right? All right. Again, I'm looking at Ruvain and Avrami. Catch me if I'm problematic. Okay, I found this difficult, the Gemara. Okay, and I'm still not satisfied either with Art Scroll's explanation. I'll tell you outright. Okay.
Is Corin any better?
Let's put it this way: the English is simpler. Okay, that doesn't mean that I accept either one of them. Okay, and I'm going to explain why as we start the Gemara. Okay, we have gathered from the Gemara that the Metzora must have his hair cut using a razor. Okay, it would appear.
That's the question that more discussing,
That's
because it
gonna
doesn't say razor. It doesn't
Well,
say
we're gonna
so.
come into that, exactly. Okay, with regards to the Nazir, we see it clearly in the past specified ta'ar. Okay, the pasuk was there. With regards to Leviim, it specified a reference to ta'ar. Okay, but with Metzorah, there is no reference to ta'ar. Given that, then, how then can we argue or can we draw a parallel in any way that the Metzora must have his hair cut or removed through a ta'ar? Okay. The Gemara seems to be trying to tell us that if you take a certain word, whether in one case it's uzikano, or in another case using birosho, okay, that the fact that these words are there automatically should tell us, implies that this means that Metzora also must use a tar. Okay, I'm still trying to be convinced. Okay,
Why do they imply that?
because they argue the word is superfluous. Okay, and by being the word superfluous, it allows for it to be drushed. All right, aroused to doresh the word. Okay, as if to say, how if you don't say, if in other cases we see clearly, for example, Nazir, that it says tar lo al rosho. Lo yavo al rosho. That's why it's always good to have a balkori in the shir, right? Okay, to correct me on the psukim. Okay, I'm not the only one who I've seen. Anyway, so since that says clear, the implication is it must mean you could have simply said the pasuk tar lo ya'aleh, because the earlier part of the pasuk already told us that he has to cut his hair. So why do you have to say his head again? The implication must be that there's something additional that word is trying to tell us. It must be that it has to be done, A, through a tar, and B, to a point that it completely removes the hair. Okay, so that's what I mean by doresh, by expounding the word. Okay, so what happens? We finish up just above, okay, where we see the, okay, so I'm going actually 2 lines above where I told us we we're going to start, right? Talmud lomar upa'at zikanam lo yigalechu haketzad. So the Gemara says, if the text tells us that you can't cut the corners right of your beard, that applies to a Kohen. And we know that with regards to a Kohen, that's prohibited.
There's also a law that applies to.
And it's also a separate law that applies to an Israelite where there it says that you should not round off the corners or destroy the corners. And since we know the method of shaving for the Kohanim dealt with a razor, what happens, right? HaKetzad, Ezahu Giluach Sheyesh Bo Hashchata. What kind of shaving is it such that would result in hashchata, the total removal, okay, of the corners of one's beard? The implication is only one kind, have omer zet ta'ar. That would tell us that has to be the use of a razor. Okay, now we pick up. Mimai, what's the basis? So the Gemara raises the following question. Dilma le'olam afilu liktu b'melkat u'berihitni. Perhaps we might suggest that it would be possible to use other implements, right? Like tweezers, like a carpenter's plane, things like that, okay? Nami mitzvah ka'avid. And they could remove their hair using these other implements, okay? All right, and therefore, they would still be satisfying the mitzvah, okay? Because remember, we said earlier, there were 3 people that had tiglachet as a mitzvah. One was the Nazir, one was the Mitzorah, and the third was the Levi, okay? So what happens? Vahaka'ate. Okay, but here we bring this question of the use of the term beard, zikano, that seemed to be telling us that it had to be done using a razor. Okay? La ashma'ina, that comes to teach us, da afilu batar lo mechayev alei, that were he to even use a razor, we might say then that he's not over on the issue of rounding the corners of his beard. Okay. In other words, maybe the prohibition of rounding the corners only applies to use of a razor and not the use of other implements.
It wouldn't be a question of removing the hairs, how?
Okay, let's see. Amre, but I would say, Isal Kadatcha, if you're going to be of the opinion, Ki avid nami b'malki devrehitmi, shapir dami, if then you're going to be opinion that they can utilize these other instruments, okay, that's all well and good, so to speak. Lishtok kra mina, then the verse should be silent. In other words, the verse shouldn't have said zikano. That's the point, okay? Va'ana amina, but I would say, okay, what happens here? Uma gabe nazir, but what about the example of a Nazareth that we say, and again, this is one of the issues we've seen, the isura kavi, that he is committing a negative act, a prohibition, the implication being that the status of becoming a Nazir is considered a negative act. Okay, remember we had a lot of discussion, okay, in the Gemara about that. It actually was only, I think, a das yachid of a Rabbi Eliezer, right? Okay, so what happens? So therefore, afilu hachi mechayev. Even in that case, all right, for the Nazir too, mechayev, he would be transgressing, removing his hair, even with the tweezers or the razor, whatever he uses. Okay, hacha the mitzvah. So here, I might argue, if we're talking about it being a mitzvah, okay, right, regarding the mitzvah, lo kol shekain. Isn't that all the more, right? The fact that he might be removing the corners of his beard, only because telling us then that the mitzvah for the Metzorah to shave overrides the biblical prohibition of saying you can't shave the corners of your face. Okay? Now, we're not done yet. All right, now we get to today's stuff. Okay, what happens? And furthermore, further attempt to prove. Okay, we're still trying to prove that a Metzora must use a ta'ar, the razor. Okay, Isal Gadata, if you're going to be of the opinion, ki avid b'malkit urehitne, mitzvah ka'avid, midelo kativ ta'ar, if you're going to think that by using these other instruments, the Metzora is still going to fulfill his mitzvah requirement of shaving, okay, because primarily the text regarding the mitzvah for Metzora does not include the word tar. What happens? Karesh Lakish. Then you must assume that you're operating following an approach of Reish Lakish, Da'amar, who tells us, Kol makom she'ata motzei aseh v'lo ta'aseh, wherever you find two statements, one that is a positive statement, a positive commandment, and one that is a negative commandment. Okay, all right. So, what example can we think of? Any number of ones. I was going to say, let's look at Nazir first, because that's the one we're more familiar with at the moment. All right, lo taleh, right? Lo yaleh tar al rosho. That's the negative commandment, but we have a positive commandment. Aseh kadosh, haroa adam, that you has to be holy and therefore let your hair grow. So I have a positive, make yourself holy by letting your hair grow, and I have a negative, you shouldn't have the razor over your head. Okay, so what happens? What is Reish Lakish going to say? Right? Kom makom she'ata motzei aseh v'lo ta'aseh, like we just showed. Im ata yachol lekayem et shnehem, if you can fulfill both of them. Okay, right? Mutab, that's best. In other words, that would seem to imply, fine, I'll use these other utensils to remove my hair, okay? And therefore, I'm not using the razor, okay? And therefore, I'm not over on the lav, okay? And I've let my hair grow, and then I should remove it with the other utensils. So I fulfill both the positive, letting my hair grow wild, and then I use these other utensils to remove my hair, and therefore I'm not transgressing the negative commandment of don't let the razor on your head, okay? V'im lav, and if not, if I can't do one act or something that can handle both of them at the same time, what happens? Yavo aseh v'yidche et lo ta'aseh. Then I use the application that the aseh takes precedence over the lo ta'aseh. All right? Okay. Now, having said that, what is the point? In other words, that the positive mitzvah now applying to the Metzora to shave would seem to override the prohibition of cutting his beard, okay, which implied the use of the razor, okay? Rabbi Eliezer says as follows, my Tama, what was the reasoning? Yalif me rosho. Okay, I learned it from that word rosho in the part, okay? That there shall be lo ya'aleh tar al rosho. Why? The Tanya, because I can learn it based on the following. Rosho. Why does it say his head? Ma Talmud lomar, lafi shene'amar gabe nazir. Because when it said it in regards to the example of the Nazirite, tar lo ya'avor al rosho, that the razor shall not go over his head. The verse has already told us previously that he has to shave his hair. Why do I need then again what would appear to be an extraneous word, his head, if it's already told us that? All right? Yechol af nazir mitzorake. I might think then that what we're talking about is an individual who was a
Is a Nazarite.
as a
and
Nazareth, and he's also a Mitzorah. He's both. Okay, all right. So what happens? Right? Yechol af nazir Mitzorah came. I might think then this applies particularly to that person of that status. Okay. Talmud Lomar, and therefore the text says Rosho. Okay, his head. All right, namely, the implication is his must be referring to a particular person or a particular someone in a particular status. Okay. All right. So what happens? Mimai, based on what do we say this? Dilma olam afilu liktu b'malkit uberhitne mitzvah ka'avi. Perhaps then we're saying that he performs his act of hair removal, okay, using these other utensils, and therefore he still fulfills the mitzvah, right? V'chitema. And if you want, and if you again want them to say, tar lamali, why then did I say that the Mitzorah also needs to use the razor? Okay, lamemra da'afilu b'tar. Then we ought to be saying and teaching it even with a razor. If we've already said,
he could do something else, but
right?
he could also do.
In other words, he could use those other utensils, but that's not the only option. He could even use the razor. Salgadata. Therefore, I might have thought to say in response to that, Amina ho'il v'gabe nazir ki avid batar mechayim. I might have then believed that were it such that in regard to this nazir, get that by use of the razor, he is transgressing, right? Because it says clearly, lo yalen tar al roshon, gabe mitzorah nami lechayev. I might then think that this individual, the mitzorah, also then would be transgressing if he used the tar. Kamash malan delo. This would come to teach us, and that's not the case, right? But the Gemara goes on and tells us, Isal if you're going to be of the opinion, ki avid b'melaket b'rehitni mitzvah ka'avid midelo katav tar karaish lakish. If you're going to say that use of these other implements still allows the mitzorah to fulfill the mitzvah, since with mitzorah again, almost the same lashon. Okay, it does not spell out in the pasuk use of a razor, right? Then you're talking about similar to the view of Reish Lakish. But if that's the case, what about the rabbi? The Rabbanan, Hi Rosho, my Darshebe. How then do they interpret? If Rosho, according to Reish Lakish, is such that he could use those other items, but maybe also use the razor, all right? So that doesn't totally still prove that the Mitzorah must use a razor. It only gives it as an added option. Okay? The Rabbanan, Hi Rosho, my Darshe, how do they darshan it? Particularly if they don't say it applies to a person who's both Nazir Mitzorah. Okay? Mibaye laho, lamidche la tahakafa. Okay, they require it in order to learn and deal with the, I'm going to say the putting off of, right, or the setting aside is a better term.
Setting aside.
Right. Of the Torah's requirement that you shouldn't round the corners of your beard. You're not permitted, the Torah requirement. Okay, the Tanya, as we learn elsewhere in the Braita, lo takifu pa'at roshchem, okay, that you don't the corners of your beard, round off the corners of your face or your head, okay, yachol, okay, af mitzorah came. I might think, therefore, that also applies to the mitzorah. right? Talmud Lomar Rosho. Therefore, that's why the rabbis, that's how they would darshan Rosho. Okay, that they would use that then to say, see, the requirement of the Metzorah to shave overrides the Torah requirement of not
Rounded.
rounding the corners of your head. Bob.
Is rounding only done with a razor? Is that the only, if you do a rounding with the scissors, is that?
Good question. Okay, one of the things, by the way, I'm going to make the connection, and it may not be the best connection. If you've ever seen pictures or movies or things like that, I view it, okay, as to how monks in the Middle Ages had the kind of hairstyle, right? It almost looked like,
Like a ball on there.
okay, with a bowl on the head and shaved all around. That's why in Hebrew, what's the word for priests, monks? Galachim. Galach, what is galach? Yeah, but it means from the word shave. Same connection, that they shaved all around, okay, because they did not leave sideburns, or they did not have beards, or things like that. They totally cut it off there, okay? So that's the connection I'm suggesting, okay, about helping us understand that the requirement for the Metzorah then, okay, would over that mitzvah, because they have to shave their whole body, that overrides the Torah prohibition of not simply shaving along the sides of your head.
What instrument we use is not clear, right?
What?
What instrument, whether it's a razor or a plane. or
Well,
a scissors.
we still haven't, right, the problem is the Gemara has not totally produced the idea that the Metzorah must use a razor.
Why have they dropped the idea of the depilatory?
What?
They've dropped the idea of the depilatory at this point.
Well, we'll see, okay.
If you're bothered by the use of a plane, I mean, I can see take off the whole scalp. I mean, are we really talking about a carpenter's plane?
No,
We're-
they had some sort of other.
Well, let's put it this way. It was probably something that was another kind of utensil that had like almost like a ruler with a sharp edge. Okay, so you could run it along, but the implication is clearly that it was remove hair at the skull level. Okay, all right.
Less sharp than a carpenter's plane, I hope.
Okay, so what happens? All right. All right. Yechol af mitzorachen, Talmud lo marosho. So the Gemara now comes back again and is still trying to clarify. First, on the one hand, you see some that claim that the requirement for a razor is based on zikano. That's what we use, right? Now we see there are others, another view that says it's based on Rosho. So the Gemara goes on and says, Lama li lemichtav Rosho. Why then does it say then the rabbis use Rosho? V'tepu klei mizikano. Why can't they also learn the requirement of the razor from the use of the extraneous word zikano from the early other pasuk? The Tanya, why? Says a Braita, zikano, regarding his beard, ma Talmud lomar, what is it trying to teach us? Lafi shene'amar, u'pa'at zikanam lo yigalechu. Okay, that the corner of their beard, they should not shave. Yachol af mitzorah came. I might have thought that I could apply that also to the example of the mitzorah.
And he should not cut his hair. because of
Exactly.
that
In other words,
negative command.
right. In other words, I might have thought, well, maybe the Metzorah is going to shave all the rest of his body, but leave that area with hair. That's what the Gemara is, I believe, is suggesting, right? Lama li lemichtav Rosho. Why then do we have it written Rosho? V'lama li lemichtav zikano. Why then in another pasuk do we seem to have the extraneous word zikano? Tzrichi. We need both, says the Gemara. Why? The ikatav rachmana zikano, were it such that the Torah had only written and we interpret zikano as an extraneous word for purposes of drash, velo katav rosho, and did not write his head, hava amina, I would have thought the following: hakafat kol harosh, lo shma hakafa. Okay? That the cutting off the corners of the entire head is not considered the actual prohibition of hakafa. Okay. Maybe it's only the rounding the corners. Maybe that's the situation. Okay. Lo shma hakafa lahachi katav rachmana rosho, and for that reason the Torah writes his head. And now we go over and we continue. Ve'i katav, and were it such that he wrote rosho velo katav zikano, and did not write the beard, hava amina, I would have said mashma tarte, that there I could have learned two things. One, the following: da'ate aseh v'dache et lo ta'aseh, that comes a positive commandment and it overrides a negative commandment. And the second, umashma the hakafat kol harosh shma hakafa, that only the destruction of one's entire hair, okay, would be fulfilling the requirement of don't round the corners. Okay, va'akati. So notice what happens. The Gemara still comes back to ask the question. Va'akati b'tar minalan. But still, how do we know, on what's our basis, that we're still trying to determine that Metzora still needs to do his shaving with a razor? Okay? Right, so the Gemara really hasn't given us strong enough proof. Okay? At least that's how I understood. Lahachi katav rachmana zikano. For that reason, the Torah wrote zikano, the Rebbe Eliezer, and as for Rebbe Eliezer, da'ate aseh v'dache et lo ta'aseh minale. If that's the case, then what about Rebbe Eliezer? If we understand that Reish Lakish presented us with an option of how a positive commandment overrides a negative, and the rabbis accept that, and Rabbi Eliezer is using a different format to derive the question of the shaving from Metzora, how does he learn that same principle? Okay?
You think he would, you think he would deny the fact that positive will?
We'll see.
No.
I
It's
can't.
accepted.
He can't. It's an accepted rule.
So the more that's why the more is asking,
So
where is he learning it?
so that's why. In other words, if you have something that everyone generally, all right, holds by, right? So what happens? So the Gemara is going to make a suggestion, right? Yalif megadilim. He's going to learn it from another source, namely we'll call it tassels. All right, tassels. Okay, tzitzis. Okay, right? Okay, so what happens? Titania. Okay, as it's taught elsewhere in a Braita, we have a negative commandment, lo tilbash shatnez, right? That you cannot wear a mixture of linen and wool, right? But as we go over now, that's why I said we'll go over a bit on Mem Bet Amud Aleph, okay? Hagdilim ta'aseh lecha mehem. But regarding these tassels, the fringes of the tzitzit, there is a positive commandment that says, right, that you make the tzitzit, that you can have wool tzitzis on a linen talus. Okay, and so in that case, the positive commandment of having the gedilim override the negative commandment of lo tilbash shatnez. So therefore, that's how we see that Rabbi Eliezer learns also the principle of aseh doche lo ta'aseh. Okay, we're going to ordinarily, if it weren't the business of Purim, I would stop here, but we're going to continue some more. Okay. Of Amar Mar. Now we come back to our earlier discussion. Right? Amar says the following: V'chulam shagilchu shelo b'tar. Okay, but in all of these situations, okay, or only one person, okay, who shaved, all right, and they did not use a razor. In other words, we said the use of those other instruments. Oh, shashiaru shtei se'arot, or that they allowed two hairs to remain, okay, which we said was not appropriate, not acceptable. What happens? Lo asu v'lo klum. We said there in those situations, okay, either they used the wrong instrument, so they didn't do the mitzvah, or they allowed hair to remain, and therefore they didn't do the mitzvah. Okay, in either of those options. Having said that, what happens? Amar Rav Acha bereid the Rav Ika. He says as follows: Zot omeret. From this we might learn the following: Rubo kekulo midoraita. Okay, that doing something, the majority of which, okay, is the usual principle operative regarding the Torah. Okay, now, what do we mean by that? Mimai, on what basis? Midegale Rachmana Gabe Nazir, as when the Torah informed us regarding the example of Nazareth. Namely, what? Biyom Hashvi'i Yilgachenu. Okay? Right? Regarding the fact that in regards to a Nazir that became Tameh, what happens? We said that he must wait 7 days. Then he does his shaving, right? Then he goes through, he brings his korbanot, and then he has to usually pay back what other days of the Nazirship that he didn't fulfill. Okay? Hachahu da'ad da'ika kulo. Here, okay, don't we have that he has to remove all his hair, right? Okay, so what happens? Ba'alma. But that is, in general, ruboka kulo. In other words, the implication of the Gemara I'm going to suggest is that the removal of all the hair is an exception to the Torah's general rules because it spells it out specifically for the Nazir. Okay, but in other situations, since the Nazir was specifically told he must remove all his hair, therefore, in other situations, the Torah's principle is majority is as if they did the whole thing. Okay? Row, right? Okay.
This is for Nazir specific.
In other words, that part of the pasuk therefore implies that Nazirite is an exception to this concept of rubo kikulo. Okay? All right. Seems to be the case. And that we shouldn't apply it then to the Nazir's concluding rituals. Okay? Now, what happens?
And that's why he says if you left over even 2 hairs.
2 hairs,
You're not.
it's nothing. It's nothing.
Because we don't apply the principle.
Right. Okay, good. Okay, so Madkifla Rabbi Yossi, but Rabbi Chanina. So there's a challenge here. Hi, Ben Nazir, Tamei Kativ. But hold on a second. The pasuk you just cited, or the part of the pasuk being cleaning, shaving on the 7th day, that does not apply to all Nazirim. That only applies in a unique situation to the Nazir who became Tameh. So how can you use that as a model to give us this principle that seems to be more overriding? All right. I ben Nazir Tameh Kati. And so what happened? Notice, Machaku Allah b'ma'arav. They laughed about this in the East. In other words, in Eretz Yisrael. Okay, what happens? Michdei Nazir Tameh the B'ta'ar Nalan. Okay, since we've now mentioned the issue of a Tameh Nazir with regards to a use of a razor that he must, okay, complete his purification process, all right, using the razor to shave, right? How do we know this? minazir tahor yalif. We can learn it from the example of a tahor nazir. Okay, namely, lite nazir tahor, velilif minazir tameh. Maybe we could learn the shaving done by a tahor nazir from what we've learned regarding the tameh nazir, namely the following: ma tameh ki shi'er shtei sa'arot v'lo klum avad, whereas a nazir who became tameh and when he shaves allowed 2 hairs to remain, it's as if he has done nothing. Hachanami, here too, ki shi'er shtei sa'arot v'lo klum avad. Here too, then, I can learn that that applies also to a normal tahor kohen, that when he finishes his term of Nazirithship, if he retains any hair, okay, it's as if he's done nothing. He hasn't satisfied his purification process or his term completion. Okay, put it that way. Bye. So now we're going to get some smart guys asking questions. Okay, all right. Abai is the first one. He asks as follows: Nazir Shagilach, the Nazirite shaves, Vishier Shtei Sa'arot, and he wound up leaving 2 hairs, okay, on his head. What happens? Samach Rosho, okay, more hairs grow on his head. Vachazar Vigilchan, he comes back and he shaves the 2 hairs that he had accidentally or whatever left over from before. Okay, Mahu, what's the status? Okay, Mima Akve, do we say that in this situation it holds it back, so to speak? Oh no, or no? In other words, is he fulfilling? After all, we can still say, well, he did do those 2 hairs only later. Well, what happens? And Rava now asks, by Rava, Nazir Shagilach, the Nazirite shaved, V'hiniach Shtei Sa'arot, and he left 2 hairs, V'gilach Echad, V'nashra Echad. He shaved 1 and 1 fell out. Okay, Mahu, what's the status there? Amarle Rav Acha midiftei leRabina, and so then Rav Acha from Diftei says to Ravina, Gilach Sa'ara, Kamabayi le Rav. Are you saying that Rav is asking a question? What happens if he's shaving 1 hair at a time? Is that the situation? Ela Ema, but rather I would say, this is the question, says Rav Acha midiftei, right? Nashra achat v'gilach achat. 1 hair fell out and he shaved the other one. Mahu, what's the situation? So Ravina's got to answer. Giluach ein kan, se'ar ein kan. Not only is there no shaving here, there's no hair here. Amarle, so he responds, Rav Acha, Giluach ein kan, se'ar ein kan, is se'ar ein kan giluach yesh kan. Okay, so he says, basically saying, se'ar, if there's no hair, okay, yes, again, if there is hair, can we say that there is any hair cutting down here? Hachi kama. This is what he really means to say. Afal pi she'se'ar ein kan, even though there's no hair here, mitzvat giluach ein kan. There's also no fulfillment of the mitzvah of shaving. Okay, and we're going to stop right here. Okay. All right. I could have tried to make a joke by telling you today is a very hair-splitting Gemara, but I did not. Yeah, I believe we did, yes. Those who want to see the funny.
Nice.